Probably the thing I've been asked the most since the news broke that the Saints had signed Emmanuel Sanders is, so does this mean the Saints won't draft a wide receiver? No, it doesn't mean that at all. But what it means is the Saints don't have to draft a wide receiver. You're not going to force yourself into reaching for a guy because you need that position. And look, the Saints have tried their hand in the draft at receiver. They used a third-round pick on Traquan Smith a couple years ago thinking he might be that guy to be the complement to Mike Thomas, and it just hasn't really worked out like they thought it might. And they've looked in free agency at a lot of different guys. They kicked the tires on Antonio Brown. They brought in Des Bryant before he got injured. I mean, we've seen them do this song and dance before with some guy. Cam Meredith was a guy they paid a lot of money from Chicago when he never got healthy. They kicked the tires on Brandon Marshall. I mean, my point is they've tried in free agency before and have come up snake eyes. They tried in the draft, hasn't really worked. That doesn't mean you stop trying or you reach in the draft. But because you've got Emmanuel Sanders now as a number 2, who's still productive, who's still healthy, good leader, locker room guy, all those things, now in the draft, you're sitting there at 24, and if let's say there's a guy you have rated in the top 16, and he's a receiver, let's say you love Henry Ruggs or you love Justin Jefferson, and they're on the board at 24. Take them. Great. And if not, okay, you're good. You don't need a receiver. I still think the Saints at some point in this draft will take a receiver, but it's not pressing to take one at 24 with your first-round pick. So, man, I love it. I love the pickup of Emmanuel Sanders. I love what the Saints have done in free agency. I love that they've addressed what they needed to. They saved some money by not signing Von Bell to the long-term deal and brought back Malcolm Jenkins, who's a great locker room guy. You've done the same with another veteran here in Emmanuel Sanders who can still play and be productive and be a complement to Mike Thomas. They re-signed DJ Swearinger today, and I don't know that Swearinger's ever going to be a starter for the New Orleans Saints. He's a former second-round pick. Of course, went to South Carolina. He's bounced around. He started his career with the Texans, and the Saints signed him this past year off the street, and he was active in one game, but mostly you were set there, and now you look at safety and you go, all right, well, you signed Malcolm Jenkins. You've still got Marcus Williams, and you drafted C.J. Gardner-Johnson last year who can play safety and nickel and a lot of other roles for you. Now Swearinger becomes a guy who can play as a backup and also in a special teams role. Not that dissimilar from what Chris Banjo did for you for a few years. I see what they're doing. They're doing it within the confines of the salary cap, and I really like it. Now, we're going to talk later in the show about what else they need to address. And I put this out on YouTube yesterday for those that didn't see it. They still have to address quarterback. Now, whether they do that in free agency or in the draft remains to be seen, but we're going to talk about that. As for Emmanuel Sanders, he was on a teleconference yesterday with the media. Here he was talking about his reaction of being in New Orleans.
First of all, I just want to say how excited I am about, joining New Orleans Saints. I've been a fan of Sean Payton and Drew Brees for a very long time. I've seen him do it at a high level for a very long time, and I'm excited to, join. Obviously to be a receiver, in this offense is something special. It reminds me of 2014, when I linked up with Payton and we were passing the ball, slinging the ball, and it was a pass-happy offense. So I'm excited to get to a system like this and, hopefully do what I did in 2014 and have one of my best years.
And that was with, of course, Pittsburgh before he went to Denver and ultimately now recently with San Francisco. Interesting thing about Emmanuel Sanders, 3 teams, 3 Super Bowls. He's been in the Super Bowl with every team he's been on. That's only been done a handful of times in the history of the NFL where one player has gone to the Super Bowl on 3 different teams. It's never happened where one player has been to the Super Bowl with 4 different teams. Emmanuel Sanders has that opportunity if the Saints can get there this year. One more from Sanders. He talked about what went into the decision to sign with the New Orleans Saints.
To play with Drew Brees, one of the greatest of all time. How could I pass up on that opportunity and to play in the Sean Payton system? It's crazy. Every time I've played in the New Orleans stadium or arena, it's always a good time. It's always a good vibe, and I just love the indoor environment and the black and just the entire environment and the songs that they play. And The past game that I played, I was just looking around like, man, this is cool, and I'm excited about getting in that stadium and putting up a lot of points and having rocking again. And, I just feel like it was the best fit for me.
Love it. Emmanuel Sanders, newest member of the New Orleans Saints, 2-year, $16 million contract, and the possibility of getting a $19 million. But the Saints get a productive player at a position of need to fill that gap, address that before you get to free agency. I'll tip my cap to Mike Detillier, who months ago, during the season, said the Saints are going to address wide receiver in veteran free agency. And he even said it as of Thursday last week when he was on with us. Still felt that way when a lot of people didn't after the Saints had spent money on Malcolm Jenkins. But lo and behold, here we are, and the Saints have signed Emmanuel Sanders, and I love the move.